Some interviews disappear not because they were forgotten, but because someone didn't want us to hear them. This recording of Stephen Hawking was long considered lost. But what he said in this conversation could have changed humanity's understanding of death, consciousness, and the very essence of the soul. In the spring of 2025, a group of researchers discovered a hidden audio file in the archives of Cambridge University. On it, Hawking's voice, reflecting on the afterlife, quantum consciousness, and the informational structure of the soul. This interview was never officially published. In it, he says, "Consciousness doesn't disappear. It transforms. We will reveal what the great physicist truly knew, why his theory challenges official science, and where the research inspired by his words has led." Stephen Hawking was not just a physicist. He became a symbol of the human mind overcoming physical limitations. Almost completely paralyzed, he continued to ponder the most complex mysteries of the universe: time, space, gravity, and, importantly, the nature of consciousness. Officially, Hawking adhered to a scientific worldview and was skeptical of religion. He repeatedly stated that he did not believe in God in the traditional sense and considered death the end of biological existence. However, there were moments when he stepped beyond the dry formula. He was interested in information theory, quantum entanglement, and black holes not just as physical objects, but as carriers of the unknown. In his later years, his thoughts on consciousness increasingly intersected with ideas once considered philosophical or even mystical. He wondered, if information does not disappear, even in a black hole, could consciousness vanish? This question became central in the interview that was deleted from the archives for unknown reasons. But now we can restore it. In this interview, Hawking discusses consciousness as a quantum structure not bound by the body. He suggests that the soul may not be a metaphysical concept, but a real informational system that is not destroyed after death. According to him, everything in the world is information. Electrons, light, atoms, gravity, even matter itself, are forms of data encoded in the structure of the universe. He references the holographic universe hypothesis, which posits that our entire reality may be a projection of a deeper, invisible dimension. Hawking also touches on Roger Penrose's ideas about quantum consciousness, and even mentions NASA's research on cognitive activity persisting after clinical death. He is cautious in his wording, but the essence is clear. Death may not be an end, but a transition. And consciousness, not a product of the brain, but an autonomous form interacting with reality through unknown laws. This approach bridges science and spirituality, though Hawking avoids religious terms. He speaks of the soul not as a matter of faith, but as a hypothesis that science cannot yet refute. At the very beginning of the interview, Hawking returns to one of the key principles of quantum physics. Information in nature does not disappear. Even if a star turns into a black hole, even if matter burns or decays, the information about its state is preserved. This is one of the foundations of the modern theory of data conservation in the universe. And it is on this idea that he builds his hypothesis about consciousness. If our brain is the carrier of consciousness, then the information it generates, by the laws of physics, cannot vanish without a trace. It must be preserved somewhere. The question is only where and in what form. Hawking asserts that consciousness may be a special quantum system, complex, non-localized, and connected to the fundamental levels of reality. He emphasizes, if the information of the soul is not a myth but a form of energy and structure, then death ceases to be annihilation. It becomes transformation. And this opens a completely new perspective on what we call the afterlife. Not as mysticism, but as an unexplored field of physical processes that science is only beginning to guess at. In the interview, Hawking carefully but confidently expresses the idea that human consciousness may not be merely electromagnetic activity in neurons, but something far more fundamental. He speaks of quantum states that can exist independently of the brain, like waves that persist even after the instrument stops playing. He references the hypothesis that microtubules in neurons can sustain quantum coherence, a coordinated structure that extends beyond conventional neurophysiology. This is a theory proposed by Roger Penrose, with whom Hawking had long scientific debates, but whose ideas he began to reconsider in his later years. Hawking notes, "If consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain, but a separate system embedded in the fabric of the universe, then the death of the brain does not necessarily mean the death of consciousness." He admits that this cannot yet be proven, but emphasizes, "The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Science does not deny the soul. It simply hasn't learned to measure it yet." One of the most surprising moments in the interview is Hawking's reflection on the holographic universe hypothesis. This theory suggests that everything we perceive as three-dimensional reality may actually be a projection formed from data located at the boundary of existence, a two-dimensional plane encoding all the information about our world. Hawking asks, if our universe is a hologram, is it possible that the soul also exists as a holographic structure, untethered to the body? He says that consciousness may be a reflection, a temporary projection of a deeper layer of reality. In this context, the disappearance of the body could be merely the turning off of the projector, not the erasure of the code itself. He calls this informational migration, the transition of consciousness from one state of organization to another. And though it sounds like science fiction, Hawking stresses this is how the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics work. Everything is a wave. Everything is information. And what we call the soul may be its most stable form. Hawking raises one of the most controversial topics in modern science, the possibility of memory existing independently of the physical brain. He points to cases where people in clinical death described events around them in detail, despite no measurable brain activity. These observations, he believes, do not fit within classical neurophysiology. If consciousness depends solely on neurons, it should not function after they shut down. But the facts suggest otherwise. Hawking proposes an alternative model. The brain may not be a storage device, but a receiver. A device that picks up signals of consciousness existing at a subtler level. It's like a radio that doesn't create music, but broadcasts it. When the receiver breaks, the signal remains. It's just no longer heard. He also draws attention to cases of children recalling past lives with astonishing accuracy. If such cases are not fabrications, they indicate that personal experience can persist outside the body. And this means consciousness is not just a byproduct of the brain. It is an independent level of reality we are only beginning to understand. Hawking touches on a topic rarely discussed openly in scientific circles, the concept of quantum death and multiple worlds. According to quantum mechanics interpretations, every choice, every event creates a branching of reality. And if this holds true for elementary particles, why couldn't it hold true for consciousness? He suggests that at the moment of death, the body may die in one version, but consciousness, as quantum information, simply continues in another branch, in another layer of the possible universe. This could explain the phenomenon of so-called out-of-body experiences and transition sensations, where a person feels their personality not ending, but flowing onward. Hawking emphasizes, we live in a reality far more fluid and multi-layered than it seems. And if quantum theory allows for the immortality of information, then consciousness may not be an object, but a flow that never ceases, only changes context. This approach not only doesn't contradict physics, but may also open the door to understanding that death is not the end of the line, but a change of trajectory. Hawking draws attention to how we perceive the brain as the center of thought, memory, and personality. But if we look deeper, an alternative picture emerges. The brain may not be the source of consciousness, but merely an interface, a biological device through which consciousness interacts with the physical world. This idea is closely tied to how modern technology handles data. Information is not created by the computer, but processed and displayed by it. By analogy, a person perceives themselves through the lens of the brain, but the self, what feels, remembers, and chooses, may exist beyond it. Hawking speaks of consciousness as a multidimensional structure, part of which is tied to the body and part of which is not. This could explain phenomena where people in comas or clinical death continue to be aware of their surroundings. It also opens a new model for perceiving life and death. If the brain is a temporary channel and consciousness is a permanent flow, then the death of the body does not disrupt the essence of being. It simply turns off the device. And the user, the soul, remains, ready to reconnect, in another reality, in another form. Hawking was never afraid to speak about complex things, but in this interview, there is a particular caution. He speaks with long pauses, as if knowing these ideas should not be voiced too loudly. And perhaps that is why the recording disappeared from the archives. It didn't fit the image of the atheist scientist, rational and predictable. His reflections on the quantum soul, the preservation of consciousness after death, and multiple realities shattered the usual boundaries between science and metaphysics, and thus they could provoke misunderstanding, criticism, or distortion. Some sources claim Hawking himself asked for this conversation not to be published, not because he renounced his words, but because he knew, for many, it would be too soon. He didn't seek to prove the existence of the soul. He simply asked questions, logical, mathematically grounded, yet capable of overturning our very understanding of what it means to be alive. And perhaps that is what makes this interview so valuable. There is no dogma in it, only pure inquiry, a sincere desire to understand what happens to us when everything ends, or only begins. Hawking does not give a direct answer to what exactly happens to consciousness at the moment of death, but he offers a model based on quantum and informational principles. He says that when biological processes cease, what begins is not disappearance but a change of form. Like matter transitioning from one state to another, consciousness may shift from the dense, bodily level to a less tangible but no less real one. He uses the term phase transition, a process where the structure of information changes but does not vanish. Just as ice becomes water and water becomes vapor. He asserts that death is not erasure, but transformation, possibly with an exit beyond space and time. It is at this moment that the soul, if it exists as a quantum structure, may free itself from the body's constraints and return to what he calls the base field. This is not a religious concept, but a physical one, a universal quantum space where everything is interconnected. Hawking admits he cannot prove this, but asks, if all matter transitions, if energy does not disappear, why should consciousness be an exception? Hawking states plainly, one of the main reasons science does not approach the concept of the soul is fear. Not fear of error, but fear of undermining the foundation of the rational world. The soul is too complex, too burdened by culture, religion, and philosophy. It frightens with its inexplicability. In the scientific community, it is customary to reject everything that cannot be measured or replicated in an experiment. But, as Hawking emphasizes, this is a limitation of the method, not reality itself. Science progresses only when it dares to venture beyond the known. He draws an analogy. Once we couldn't measure electricity, but that didn't mean it didn't exist. The same applies to consciousness. If the soul is not a poetic symbol, but a structure embedded in the laws of the universe, then sooner or later, science must find a way to describe it. This may require new formulas, new instruments, new ways of thinking. And then what is considered mysticism today may become part of physics. Hawking does not call for belief. He calls for the courage to ask. Because it is in the question that discovery lies. And perhaps the future of science is a future where the soul is no longer a taboo. Contrary to popular belief, Hawking was not a strict materialist. He often emphasized that the universe is far more complex than we can imagine, and that science has no absolute answers. He was skeptical of religious interpretations of the afterlife, but did not dismiss the possibility of consciousness existing after death. In his unpublished interview, he says that immortality in the traditional sense may be an illusion, but information, including the information of personality, can exist in another form. He uses the term continuum of consciousness, describing it as a flow that can change carriers, like a river flowing through different channels. For him, the idea of the soul is a hypothesis worthy of study. Not a myth, but another level of reality, not yet described by an equation. He stresses that true science should not fear metaphysics if it leads to new questions. At the end of the recording, he speaks softly, almost in a whisper. Perhaps death is not an end, but a chance to hear who we are without the noise of the world. These words were never officially heard. But now you know what he truly thought. Stephen Hawking was a man of science. He did not speculate without equations, did not embrace blind faith, and did not make bold claims. But in this forbidden interview, he may have come closer than anyone to unraveling what lies beyond the final frontier. He did not speak of an immortal soul in the religious sense. He spoke of consciousness as a quantum process, of the soul as a structure capable of existing beyond the body. He did not deny death, but invited us to see it not as an end, but as a transformation. His central idea, if information does not disappear, if consciousness is not a product but a wave, then death becomes not disappearance but continuation, a change of form, a change of medium. This was not an assertion. It was an invitation to reflect. Perhaps for the first time in history, a physicist of such stature gave voice to what humanity has felt for centuries but could not explain. And now that you've heard these words, they cannot be forgotten. If Hawking's words are true, what opens before us is not just a new field of science, it is a new perspective on the very nature of reality. We are no longer forced to choose between faith and knowledge, between science and spirit, because perhaps they have long been following the same trajectory, merely speaking different languages. His reflections do not provide a ready answer, but offer something greater: direction. If consciousness does not die, but transitions, then everything we do, think and feel does not vanish. It continues, and death is not a boundary, but a moment where what awaits us is not an end, but a revelation, And perhaps we fear it not because we don't know what lies beyond, but because we intuitively sense, there, everything is real. What you've just heard was never officially published. This recording vanished from the archives, perhaps by accident, or perhaps because it raises too many questions. Stephen Hawking, one of the brightest minds of our time, didn't give us a direct answer. But he left us with the most important thing: the right to ask, the right to search. He spoke of the soul not as a matter of faith, but as a hypothesis, of consciousness, not as a function of the brain, but as a wave passing through reality. He did not claim that death is a continuation, but he did not rule it out either. And if a man of such stature allowed for the possibility of something beyond life, can we afford to dismiss it without thought? If you've watched this to the end, perhaps your soul remembered something too, like if you felt a resonance. Subscribe to After All. Here, we gather the voices of those seeking answers to the most forbidden questions. And now, write in the comments, do you believe consciousness continues after death? And if so, what does that change about how you live right now?